Over the years, the D.C. Police Department has collected hundreds of historical items that all help to tell the story of the Metropolitan Police Department. For years, the items were on display here at police headquarters. But the display was on the top floor of this building, and leaks in the roof put many of the artifacts at risk. So they were put into storage for safekeeping. Up until his retirement earlier this year, Lieutenant Nick Brule was in charge of caring for and cataloging all the items. On his last day on the force, Brule took the time to show off some of the most remarkable items in the department's collection.
So this is a lot of the things that were in the police museum upstairs. I folded down into here. You can step on in. We store, like I said, I don't throw anything out and keep whatever I can. Packed in this, the Smithsonian packed that older officer's uniform for me. They stuffed it and puffed it up and packed it in an acid-free box, so we would make sure that uniform, isn't hurt. And according to when you talk to some of these folks, for a lot of these items to be displayed, it's 6 months on and 5 years off. So that's how I guess they rotate exhibits so that they don't get damaged.
Brule is showing off the most valuable item the department has. This arrest book contains the first handwritten record of the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln.
J.W. Booth was the person who shot the president. And it says the excitement was great throughout the precinct, the feeling deep, but the people were orderly. And again, I've got this translated in the file cabinet, and I can show you exactly what it says. But so this was the actual telegram that went out to all the precincts recording the assassination. And you can tell that it was open to this page because the ink is a little darker on some of the other pages. For example, that page is just a little bit darker. So that's one of the things we try.
So what were some of the other things that happened on this same day?
So you have, historically, you had John Parker, who's a private with the Metropolitan Police Department, who is supposed to have, as far as we know, escorted the president from the carriage to the booth, no pun intended, to watch, or the balcony to watch the performance of a play called Our American Cousin. I think they showed up late. And there's a lot of historic speculation about Parker. Why was he assigned? He was a notoriously bad policeman. And some of the records indicate that Parker, once he escorted him up to the balcony, left and either went to the saloon next door. Some have speculated that he was told to get a better seat, since Lincoln really had no notion of personal security like that, despite having been shot at. I think in between from the White House to the War Office, one night he was shot at, and of course he had come under fire at Fort Stevens. But also, interestingly enough, in that theater at that play was A.C. Richards, who's the major and superintendent of the Metropolitan Police Department. So he was there to immediately go and transmit the telegraph and to start things in motion to try and close bridges and all that kind of stuff. And it's my understanding that Booth was able to make it across, I think it was the Long Bridge before it was closed. So Parker disappears that night. He's not seen again until, I think, early the next morning, and he brings in a prostitute, which is just almost his way of covering something up. And she's immediately dismissed because not only do they not have time to deal with arrest for prostitution, but she clearly had nothing to do with the crime. And I have some photo copies of the detective log, which I believe is now part of the National Archives, where you can see Parker brings in somebody who's immediately dismissed. But items of evidence are recorded in that log. It's the Metropolitan Police Detective log, so you have his hat, the pistol, opera glasses, items like that are all recovered as items of evidence.
And where are all those items?
Those are probably over at the Ford's Theater.
Oh,
they have a museum there.
They do,
yeah,
okay.
they do. I believe the pistol is there.
Okay.
And I think even the ball is there, I think.
Other items date back to the 1800s as well, including this police blotter from 1863. It's the oldest blotter the department has, and it paints a picture of Washington during the Civil War, when Union troops occupied the capital city.
The police department had a terrible time with soldiers here. You had tens of thousands of soldiers camped out throughout the city. And it's allegedly told the story that, the term hooker came from General Joseph Hooker, his troops being so popular with the prostitutes that they called those hookers. They were hookers' girls, so the terms kind of stuck. I've been told that that's correct. I've also been told that that's not correct. I just think it's good lore.
Stay right there, because when News Plus returns, artifacts from another assassination of a president and some rare and nasty tools the police have in their archives. Welcome back to News Plus, everyone. If you're just joining us, we're devoting our entire show this week to the history of the DC Police Department. News Plus got a rare behind-the-scenes look at the treasure trove of artifacts that make up the department's collection. Currently, they're being kept in an old telephone closet and an overflowing office. Among the items are these stamps, once used on police reports to indicate the manner of murders being investigated. A reminder that not too long ago, abortion was considered a form of murder in the district.
It was a shooting, it was a stabbing, it was a release case, meaning it happened in another jurisdiction, because sometimes you get called to hospitals and there's somebody in there and you find out, well, he was shot in Prince George's County, or it was a traffic death. So you had a number of different ways: overdose, industrial accident. So the clerk who was managing what we call the death book, or the homicide book, would be able to stamp that type of death on there, or whatever the case may be.
Now, the one that jumps out is abortion.
Abortion, right? Yeah.
Is that because
back in the day it was against the law? Yeah, it was against the law, and that was a charge. So anybody who performed an abortion would be charged with abortion. So
what is this used for here?
This is an arrest book. So again, I keep saying back in the day. That's probably a bad phrase, but it was on a turnstile because the arrest book was public. So a reporter like yourself would come in, and that was back when precincts, when you walked in, there was an elevated level where usually a sergeant or a station clerk sat. The book was designed to swivel, so once you're done being arrested, you could either sign for your property or sign out, or someone like you could come in and inspect the book. So this is an old arrest book, but not that old. It's from 1989. I actually have a couple of arrests on here. And this was in the CID, which is the Criminal Investigations Division, the CID Desk Lieutenant's office. We don't have a CID Desk Lieutenant's office anymore, but back in the day you did, for things like check and fraud, any prescription fraud that was going on, or any major narcotic cases or anything like that would all be booked through the CID Desk Lieutenant. And incidentally, that's where you were supposed to bring somebody if they were requesting political asylum. Yeah.
How often did that happen?
Not as long as I've been here, and I think they go to different. I think the State Department handles that quickly. Yeah. So that's pretty much it. The old assignment board, which takes you back to Chief Murray. If you ever watch Barney Miller and remember the peg board, that's kind of the same idea. You could pull these sticks in and out. The old beat maps. This is we don't have scout car beats anymore. The city used to be divided up into these scout car beats. And when I came on, I had Scout 63's beat, which is the biggest beat in the city, and that's all upper northwest. So you had Western Avenue to Military to Rock Creek, and that beat was almost as big as the 3rd District. That was my scout car beat when I came on. That's the huge beat to patrol. So now we have patrol service areas.
Is there a car 54?
Was there 54? Yes, there was in the 6th District.
Car 54.
Where are you? Right, car 54, where are you? Exactly. This was from a demonstration that folks were using. They had a rubber band behind it, and one of our officers grabbed it after it was left in the street, and it was U.S. out of everywhere. Matter of fact, I kept one of the sleeping dragons from IMF. And we have a team that comes and cuts folks out of these things. And what they would do is the protesters would lay down and link arms through this metal hold here, because you can't break their grip. Not without really hurting somebody, you can't. And with the PVC piping, you can't get into unlace their fingers, so what they would have to do is come in and gingerly carve to where they could then come and pry your fingers loose and yank you out of this thing. So you would get 10 or 12 demonstrators all laying down in the street, slung together like this, and you couldn't really move them.
Uniforms also help to tell the department's story. This one dates back to 1880. Each of these gold bars on the sleeve represents 5 years of service. This was worn by a 30-year member of the department.
So that's 35 years.
Is this where copper comes from?
No, copper comes from Chicago, and that term was coined in Chicago when I believe the badges well, they had the pie plate badges in Chicago, and then they were made allegedly of copper, and that's my understanding. Again, that could be lore, but that's where
Constable on patrol.
oh,
the big buttons.
it could very well be. I've heard constable on patrol as well, there's some other lore that obviously can't be published, but if you're familiar with the word that the F-bomb.
Right.
In English police blotters, if you were caught with a woman, you would be booked for unlawful carnal knowledge. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine a constable bringing somebody in saying, man, I caught him, in the back, or whatever.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
I've been told that it's not from that. It's from a German word called Fuch or something, but
Right.
the lore is that that's where the word came from. So I like the lore. Again, I like the lore better. This uniform is a reproduction, and it got AG buttons on it, so it's from the auxiliary guards, so it's very similar to what the auxiliary guard would have worn. They may have had that clacker, or I've just put this whistle on him because that's, they did have whistles. And in this if this were an officer's uniform, they would wear a chain hooked to their button because badges were frequent targets of being snatched off your chest. Even back in the early days, the old idea of, you take that badge off and I clean the floor with you or whatever. So badges were constantly being ripped off of uniforms. So they had a chain so you couldn't take them all the way up. This is, that's from 1971 era. Very similar to what they would have worn on May Day with the baseball helmets. 6 rounds of ammunition, the old mace. And back then, they even on the hot days in May, they had to wear their what was called a combination coat or a reefer to be part of their uniform. And so that was very similar to what they would be wearing back then. And then this coat was actually found. This is beautiful, long winter coat, very thick. If you go through the pockets, you can see that you can. There's a side flap, I believe, on these pockets. Not on this one. Yeah, here. There's a side flap so you can get to your revolver if you have to. This was one of the winter coats that would have been worn in the 20s, 30s, right up into the 40s, I think.
Of course, there are badges, lots of badges, including special badges issued for each presidential inauguration. And there are batons or nightsticks, including this one that wasn't department issued. When you press a button on the grip, little spikes pop out.
Coming up, these spikes.
I mean, that's just a nasty, nasty weapon.
In the early days, many of these items were displayed in what the chief at the time called the Cabinet of Curiosities.
So back in the 1880s, maybe a little bit earlier, the major and superintendent in charge of the police department kept a glass case of items of evidence and pieces of history that related to murder cases or any famous case.
One of those pieces of history, these handcuffs, used on the gunman who killed President James Garfield. One of the most fragile items is this wooden rattle, much like a baby's rattle. Officers would twirl it around to call for help. Rule says everyone who sees it asks to try it out, and the answer is always the same.
Now, can you clack this for us?
No, I don't want to, yeah. And I will tell you that the chief got ready to do it, and I was like, hey, chief, look what I got. No, please don't do that.
There's more of our history lesson coming up next when News Plus returns. We look at some of the more recent history of the department, including the Air Florida crash into the 14th Street Bridge. Welcome back to News Plus. I'm Mark Seagraves. Now we continue our exclusive look inside the historic archives of the D.C. Police Department. The botched break-in at the Watergate Hotel back in 1972. The department still has several items related to that day, many on display in a glass case in this hallway at police headquarters. This handwritten arrest record shows the fake names each of the burglars gave to police the night they were arrested. And this picture shows the officers who were first on the scene the night the call went out.
Raul Godin, Jean Valdez, Edward Martin, and then there's another 2 on the other side. I'm not going to turn the page. And like I said, I couldn't remember which one Edward Martin was. It's in that book. But those were the aliases they gave when they were
And then
arrested.
the officers arriving.
And so this is a photograph of the officers who were in an unmarked sedan. Paul Leeper, Carl Schaeffler, and John Barrett. John Barrett being the one with the beard and the longer hair, and Leeper coming out of the driver's side, Schaeffler unfortunately turning away. That's basically where they were and when they pulled up, how they looked when they pulled up that night to respond to the call for the alleged break-in.
In this same hallway, you can see an old gas lantern that once stood in front of a police station.
I don't know where it stood, but it would have been out in front of the precinct, almost like those globes you would see in all those old TV shows where the police station was. They had huge globes. Very similar. You'd have a gas light standing in front of the police station. And green used to be the international color for a police station. People would know if there was a green light out there, that was generally a police station. So we had a green lantern for marking where our police stations were.
And one of the few remaining police call boxes that is still intact.
Would come in and a patrolman would unlock the box, and then he would pick up the phone, and as the receiver clicked up, a light would go on in the precinct where the phone was wired to, and they would know exactly where he was. And he used to have to call in on the hour, the top of the hour, or on the half, and report his position. And you should never call from the same box twice, otherwise the patrol signal systems sergeant knows you haven't moved. So the idea was to patrol your beat and call from different call boxes. One of the greatest memories that policemen have is having to get a prisoner to the box to call for the transport. And a lot of people literally had to fight with their prisoners, getting them to the box and manhandling them while trying to call for help.
And there are some rather gruesome items in the collection as well. This front page picture from the Washington Post in 1950 shows the dead body of one of the men who tried to assassinate President Harry Truman at the Blair House, right across from the White House. And these pictures are from the Air Florida crash into the 14th Street Bridge in 1982 that killed 78 people. Many of the pictures just too graphic to show.
So I remember back at the academy, they had a video of it, and it was a very hard thing to watch because those people were being pulled from the water and frozen, with their ties still on, pens in their pockets, just kind of a very eerie feeling watching all that. And of course, that same day, Metro had its first fatal accident, that very same day.
Stay right there. More of News Plus right after this. That's News Plus for this week, folks. If you want to find out more about the history of the Metropolitan Police Department, it's all right here in the 150th anniversary book, The History of the Metropolitan Police Department. You can get it online at the department's website. That's News Plus for this week. Remember, if you want to stay current with all the breaking news in our area, you should be following me on Twitter. We'll see you next week.